Good morning and welcome to our Kimmel Bay vlog in our series of summer favourites. I want to look at what are my favourite lesser known Bible characters. Well, lesser known to us maybe, but really well known to God. I'm thinking of Enoch in Genesis chapter 5. There are two other places in the Bible where he's mentioned, but I'd like to focus on this. Genesis chapter 5 verse 21. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. You remember the oldest man in the Bible? But we're not looking at him. Let's look at his dad. After Enoch became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God. He walked with God. When you described Enoch, if you were to describe his life of faith, it would be just that. Enoch walks with God. Nothing legalistic necessarily. Nothing stuffy, not religious, just an unhindered communion and walking with the divine. Wonderful. What a wonderful way to describe our life of faith. Let's break that down a little. The Bible says Enoch walked with God. Now, I'm sure he loved walking. I mean, who doesn't in these days of sun? There were others, no doubt, that he walked with, but it seems that his preferred companion is God. I love that verse in Genesis chapter 3, I think it is, where it says that Adam walked with God in the cool of the day, that God descended and walked with Adam in companionship, in company. Enoch did the same. He walked with God. It suggests harmony. They got on, communion. They spoke the same language. They walked at the same pace. They lived the same rhythm. Amos chapter 3 and verse 3, the prophet says, "Can two walk together unless they be agreed?" So Enoch and God agreed. Can they walk together unless they've made an appointment? So you knew at a certain time where Enoch would be. He would be walking with God. They just got on. Enoch and God walked in the same direction. They had the same topic of conversation. They spoke the same language. They had the same interests. The two on the road to Emmaus, Luke 24, you remember, they were walking and Jesus drew near and walked with them. And Enoch walked with God. They walked together. Not too slow, not too fast, not falsely, not pretending. Always conscious. You were always conscious that Enoch didn't walk alone. You knew that someone accompanied him. And I believe, in measure, the same experience is open to us today. That we can walk with God, that we can enjoy communion with him. Not that everything will go perfect or that nothing will upset us. We still have emotions, need to express them appropriately. But it means that walking with God, we will always have divine company. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me, walking with God. Let's look at it a little more. It says Enoch walked with God. Now that suggests it was a habit, a custom. He walked, divine company. It suggests steadiness, progress in his daily life. A lovely verse in Isaiah that says those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength talks about three types of progress. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. And they shall walk and not faint. And here we're not talking about the flight of wonderful spiritual experiences or running in service. It's just Enoch walked with God, the daily round and common task. Enoch walked with God. Not in a monastery, sanctimonious way, but like our brother Lawrence, who in the monastery said, the lovely French monk who said that he was just as aware of God's presence when he was washing dishes as when he was in the sacrament. And you know, when you walk with God, it affects others. One of my favourite spiritual teachers talks about the death of her mother, and in the funeral, someone spoke to her and said, "Do you know, your mum, whenever I was with her, I always felt good about myself. I always felt better about myself." What a wonderful thing that living in God's presence should have an effect on others so that they should know and feel themselves loved by God. An interesting thing about this verse in Genesis 5, it tells us when Enoch began to walk with God. In verse 21, when Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God. No, I hope I'm not reading too much into that into that verse, but it seems to say that he began to walk with God after his son was born. Almost as if the birth of a son brought him up sharp, made him aware of responsibilities, and just caused him to seek God so that he could be a blessing to his son. And I wonder if certain things in our life, God calls our attention, maybe the birth of a child, maybe the illness or the death of a child, maybe a diagnosis, maybe some shocking experience or some delightful experience, some joy. And it makes us think, makes us stop. And we have that desire to deepen our communion with God, to know him more. Enoch walked with God. The interesting thing is that other people noticed in Hebrews 11, one of the other places where Enoch is mentioned, verse 5, Hebrews 11, verse 5, by faith Enoch was taken. Well, we'll look at that in just a moment. Before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Others noted it. Speaking of Enoch, you would say, he pleased God. God would say, Enoch, I'm pleased with him. Abraham was known as the friend of God. I just love that, Do you know where Abraham lives? Who's that? The friend of God. Enoch, the one that walks with God. Other people knew. And then the other time he's mentioned in the Bible is in the lesser-known book of Jude and verse 14. There's only one chapter. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, he prophesied about really wickedness and how it would be worked out. Listen to what Enoch, our man, said. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone. Wow, it seems as if Enoch, walking with God gave him a glimpse of things to come, a discernment that was quite unusual, a clarity, an understanding that gave him that joy of communing with God. And then, one day, Enoch wasn't around. Back to Genesis 5 and verse 21, verse 23. Although altogether Enoch lived 365 years, Enoch walked with God. And then, Genesis 5:24, Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more because God took him away. People looked for him, they searched for Enoch, but he'd gone, they couldn't find him. God had taken him. Again, Hebrews 11, you with me? Verse 5, by faith, Enoch was taken from this life. He skipped death, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. There's a lovely story of a Sunday school lesson, and a child was listening to this in the wonderful way children do, and went home and said, Enoch walked with God, and one day they ended up at the end of their journey nearer to God's house than Enoch's. And so God said, Enoch, would you like to come home with me? And he went. Enoch didn't return, and no one was surprised. God had taken him. So Enoch walked with God. What about us? Walking with God means step-by-step communion with the divine. What do we need to do in order to walk more in step with God? What separates you, maybe, from walking more in step with God? And the wonderful thing is, it begins right where we are. So let's begin, step by step, walking with God today. He invites us to do it.